Hello, everyone.
Did you see my dad?
Hi. This actually is the event. um, yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name's Elisa. I'm on the events team here at Politics and Prose, where we now host in-person and virtual events, along with partnered events, trips, and classes. For a list of everything that we have confirmed, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. So before we get started today, I would like you to please silence your cell phones just to avoid any disruptions during the event. And I see that, everybody's wearing masks, but if you happen to need an extra one, we have plenty of them at the front of the store. So when we get to the time for opening the floor to your questions, we've placed a microphone by this big pillar over here. So please line up at the mic so that everybody can hear your question. And we'll also be recording, and we really want to capture the questions and answers, so please walk up to the mic. Following the Q&A, we'll have a signing up here at this big table. So if you haven't purchased your book already, we have plenty of copies up at the registers. And we'll ask you to line up starting at that same pillar next to the microphone, and we'll come by to ask for your name for personalization, so please just have your books out and ready for us. Once the event is complete, we ask that you please fold up your chairs and lean them against a sturdy bookshelf just to help us clean up a bit. So now, without further ado, tonight I'm very excited to welcome Aggie Blum Thompson, celebrating the release of All the Dirty Secrets. Aggie Blum Thompson worked as a newspaper reporter covering cops, courts, and trials with a healthy dose of the mundane mixed in. Her writing has appeared in such newspapers as the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. Her first novel, I Don't Forgive You, was called a perceptive and beautifully assured piece of domestic noir by the Washington Post. Aggie lives just over the Washington, D.C. line in Bethesda, Maryland, with her husband, 2 children, cat, and dog. Thompson will be in conversation with Virginia Hume. Hume worked for many years in politics and public affairs. They say truth is stranger than fiction. At some point, she decided that politics was getting a little too strange, and so she turned to fiction. Her debut novel, Haven Point, came out last June on the same day as Aggie's debut, I Don't Forgive You. Hume lives in Chevy Chase with her husband, their 2 daughters, and an undergroomed Bichon named Chester. So please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Aggie Blum Thompson and Virginia Hume.
I don't know.
You don't know?
Okay.
I think we do. Well, we do for recording purposes,
Excellent. Right. Good point, Virginia.
Good. Thanks, Aggie. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Aggie, for inviting me to do this with you.
It's my pleasure, and thank you, everyone, for braving the heat on this revolting day to come out, because I know it's easier to stay at home.
I know. I've been away for a little while, and I was drying my hair, and then I was like, wait, what am I doing? Like, why am I trying? Like, I walked outside. I was like, give it up. Put it in a ponytail. Forget it. Yeah. This is a real treat for me because, well, for many reasons. First, because it feels very natural, because Aggie and I have been in conversation since early last year. As Elisa mentioned, our debut novels came out on the same day. And if there are any aspiring writers, if you do have a novel that comes out in the second year of a global pandemic, I advise you to find someone who has a novel, same publisher even, different imprint, but same publisher, that comes out on the same day. Because so we've been in fairly constant conversation.
Yes.
It's like a bit of a black box on the best of days, but like last year, it was supposed to be like wide open, and it really kind of wasn't. And so I was so clueless, and Aggie was less clueless.
Was I?
Marginally.
Sometimes, on some days.
Marginally. Maybe. And we
Marginally,
were clueless in different areas. And it's also a treat because I love this book. I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning reading it. I waited until I was pretty close to the event, so it would be very fresh. Fortunately, I finished it at 3 a.m., but not this morning. So I'm recovered, and I do forgive you. A little play on your book. And 2, as someone who grew up in Washington, went to public schools, private schools, just about every equation you can imagine in our family, this was all very familiar to me, especially.
It is based on you, Virginia. So.
Well, I was afraid of that. Especially the customs and traditions that are unique, if not to DC, then, the Mid-Atlantic region. One in particular that's at the center of the novel. So I just wanted to invite you to talk about that tradition and what inspired you, because I don't think that you were familiar with it until you moved to the DC area.
Beach Week is not a thing in New York, and it's definitely not a thing on Long Island. And maybe that's because the beach is right there, but I'd never heard of this until I married my wonderful husband, John, and moved down to DC. And I learned that parents rented their graduating seniors' houses on the shore, oftentimes supplied them alcohol, and then they were out there partying for like a week. And I thought that was pretty phenomenal. And then it kind of went to the back of my mind. And there's this hearing that happened a couple years ago, maybe you remember, and a calendar was introduced into evidence at this hearing, and the calendar said Beach Week across one full week. And I think a lot of people around the country said, what is that? And there was like a flurry of articles in the Atlantic and all these newspapers trying to explain Beach Week to people. And that's when I thought, I've got to set a murder there.
Yeah. That's very fitting. So my parents were very young, and so everyone thought they were extremely hip. But they were being very young. They were 20 and 22 years old when I was born. Meant that they were like completely onto my game. Like they would, if they went out of town, they'd install not one but two teachers in the house to stay with us. Like there was no having a party. And I think they were playing, because I started going to summer camp. I didn't go to Beach Week because I worked at a camp in the like Southwest Virginia, and they got out of school earlier and camp starts earlier, and I was off. I went for like one night, one time, and that was it. And now I think they sent me to camp at 9, thinking if she likes it, she'll never go to Beach Week. That was the only way. So it is rather horrifying. And the idea of people doing it and almost like in all the dirty secrets, you have people almost nostalgic about their own Beach Week experience.
Well, is anybody in this audience nostalgic about their Beach Week experience? I think my husband, yes. Right? I mean, the defense of Beach Week is that these kids are 18, they're going to college, you're kidding yourself if they're not going to drink anyway, so why not let them enjoy themselves?
Trash somebody's house in the process, and anyway. Well, tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to come up with this particular story. I know you have a background in police reporting.
Yes.
And I would imagine that informed it in some ways. And I would love to hear about how you use that, and not just in All the Dirty Secrets, but also in I Don't Forgive You and your novels to come.
When I was a reporter and I would go out, I started off as a night cops reporter in Wilmington, North Carolina, which I feel is basically a sitcom, like Jewish Long Island girl goes to Wilmington, North Carolina. It was really fun and really eye-opening. I was really a fish out of water, but I did get to carry around a police scanner, and I learned all the 10 codes, and I would listen for 10 codes. And my own personal little trick was to try and get to a crime scene before the police got there. They did not like that, but I did it twice. One was a bank robbery, and one was a carjacking. And both times I was threatened with arrest for talking to witnesses and tampering with an investigation. But there were a lot of sort of things that happened covering the police that don't get into the stories. A lot of bits of dialogue, a lot of little tiny, human interest stories or things you observe that they're just not really right for a newspaper. I mean, sometimes they are. Like when I covered cops here in Montgomery County for the Montgomery County Gazette, rest in peace, and I did a big story. I think it was like 2005. A girl had come to me and had been, I'm sorry, this is like NC-17, but had been gang raped by a coworker who had invited her to a motel, and she, a bunch of his friends were there, and immediately that night, she had gone to the hospital, and when she was having her rape kit done, the Montgomery County Police had provided her with a form that she could sign that would absolve them of investigating the crime at all. So she changed her mind the next day, and she wanted to pursue, and they told her it's too late. You've signed this form. So that's when she came to me. And I went to the police and I said, I heard this crazy thing. I heard you're, giving rape victims a form that signs that absolves you of investigating a felony, but that can't possibly be right. And I was wondering why we had such low rape stats in the county. And it turned out that this was their policy. And I never put this in the paper, and they should be grateful for this, but I had detectives and police captains say things like, well, she went to that hotel room by herself. Well, she was on birth control. You know what that means. I was like, that she has
and this wasn't
cramps.
And
No.
Aggie's not 85 years old. Like, this wasn't 50 years ago.
No, this is 2005. And I said, I have a notebook, I have a pen, I'm a newspaper reporter, right? They said all kinds of things to me. I always gave them a chance to kind of put it in a better light. But none of that went into my story. But I did take on the form, and Montgomery County Council had a meeting, and they condemned the form, and the policy was subsequently very quickly dropped, and that is no longer the policy in Montgomery County. Thank you. So, but there was a lot of stuff that, went in my side notebook that didn't go in the main notebook. And that happened a lot as a police reporter.
So in your story, without giving away too much, you have a reporter on the Delaware shore.
Yes, the main character is also a former police reporter. So
yeah, and the cops on the Delaware shore were maybe not enthusiastic or as aggressive as they could be. It sounds like your experience as a police reporter might have touched a little bit on how you had the cops behave in this story.
I think, the way my experience really was shown in this story is just in how slowly an investigation can move. It wasn't really about bad behavior on the part of the police, but just that an investigation moves at its own pace and not the Law and Order pace of 40 minutes with commercials. And it's so frustrating. And when you're on the outside, you get so little information. Police don't really like to be forthcoming, understandably, about what's going on. And then when it's all over, there are oftentimes many loose ends that don't get tied up. Justice doesn't look quite as pretty as it does in TV shows or in movies, and that can leave people very frustrated for forever, really, for years and years.
So you have a school at the center of all the dirty secrets called Washington Prep, and I'm sure that has lots of people wondering if that's supposed to be some mashup of a couple of different schools. I don't know what, but just as someone who went to you're like me, I think you had sort of a hybrid.
Right.
Education.
I went to public school on Long Island up through 10th grade, and my last 2 years I went to boarding school in Massachusetts, a very elite boarding school.
So you've done it all.
Yes.
So you've witnessed this, the kinds of behaviors.
I saw none of this at my boarding school.
No.
Nobody murdered anybody. Nobody covered anything up. Nothing like this at all.
So how do you, as someone coming to the DC area, I feel like it is sort of a, teenagers to some extent are teenagers, and there's an elite culture in a lot of metropolitan areas that lends itself to certain behaviors, but there is something sort of bizarre or maybe peculiar about the creature that is the DC teenager and I would say not just private schools, but some public schools and some very affluent areas here where people, their parents are powerful and trying to protect them. And I'm just curious, as someone who came from another area, how this looked to you when you moved here, like whether you feel like you have sort of an insider-outsider perspective on it.
Very much an outsider. I mean, where I grew up, sort of the wealthy people were sort of the sons of dentists or orthodontists, and not the sons and daughters of senators and attorneys generals, and is that how you say that? Attorneys generals?
Yeah.
Attorneys general?
AGs.
Exactly. And it's a different kind of power, right? Like being the guy who owns the local, toy store and kind of is a big shot in a town is very different than in DC. And I was really fascinated by the idea of this kind of huge, not just generational wealth, but generational power, and the idea that people have access to that kind of power through through their family and through their parents. Just got my brain working of what's the worst thing you could possibly get away with, right? Mm-hmm. Like we all know that when we see those diplomatic plates, they're collecting parking tickets like it's no tomorrow. But like, what if they really tried to get away with something? This is not a slur against diplomats anywhere. I'm just saying that's the way my brain works. Is like, what if we had a group of people who just didn't think the rules applied to them at all in any category?
In any way, shape,
or form.
And also the influence that these families can have, and this I would say happens, you see sometimes at the university level too, on the schools.
Right.
Because if your name's on a library or, and you see some of that at play here. Do you want to just talk, just without spoilers, just a little bit more about, having said that it takes place at 2 different beach weeks and involves the notorious Washington prep. Just a little bit more about the story and what inspired you to tell it.
It's a thriller, and it's told in today's timeline, and a chunk of it is told in 1994. And it's about a woman named Liza Gold who works at a school called Washington Prep. She's ride or die. She loves the school. She's a booster, and she went to the school. She's an alum, and she has this crew of friends who all went there, and they've gone on to become powerful people. And now her own daughter goes there. 25 years ago, her friend went to Beach Week and drowned, and that's sort of something that's haunted her. And now, in today's timeline, her daughter has a similar experience where she goes to Beach Week and another girl dies. And her daughter's convinced these 2 deaths are connected. The mom does not necessarily want to see that in the beginning, especially if it implicates her employer and her former school, and if it drags her friends into it. But, it all comes out in the end.
So lots of twists and turns. I wonder, just a process question, whether so dual narrative novel and 2 different, very different time periods. Do you write those individually, and also just more generally, are you, to borrow the vernacular of writers, a plotter or a pantser? Do you think through the plot, or do you write by the seat of your pants?
So I definitely start off with a notion, and I have a couple of ideas of what some of the twists are going to be, but that's as far as the plotting goes. I liken it to driving cross country, where you're going to hit California, and maybe you want to stop in Chicago or Arches National Park along the way, but then everything else is sort of spontaneous. Maybe you'll take a detour here or a detour there. Things change a lot, while you're on the road.
So, but when you sit down to write, do you know what, are you working on a particular chapter? Do you do the 2 narratives differently, or?
So with the timeline, my books are really heavily plotted. They're not, with literary fiction, you have more leeway, I think, to kind of allow the plot to develop more slowly because it's very character driven. But with thrillers, I feel sort of an obligation to deliver a chapter. So I do a very rigorous sort of system where it's like, for this one I did, Liza, 1994, Zoe, Liza, 1994, Zoe, up and down. So I made it out so it was basically equal. And then I made sure that every single chapter was advancing the plot a little further, that we were never just standing still or even going backwards, but that the plot, like a ball in a game, was moving down the field, always moving down the field. And I tried not to be in one point of view more than 2 chapters in a row, so you didn't forget about the other people. But I hate those books that have a dual timeline, and you get to that past timeline, you're like, why am I here, right? Like, okay, so you worked at a soda fountain in 1963. We get it, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, here we are back at the soda fountain in 1963. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Those dual timelines. So I really wanted you to be as excited about reading the 1994 parts as about the present day parts. So I made sure to have a lot of plot points in the past that delivered movement forward too. that answer?
Yes, it does. And I think what's interesting to me, I mean, I don't really understand exactly how someone writes a thriller by the seat of their pants. Like, I'm not sure. I'm always fascinated by people saying, I just sit down and it all just comes. I'm like, how do you even do that? Especially, as you say, Aggie, when you have some genre expectations.
Right.
And I think, every author, I think, sort of takes some liberties with those expectations, or things would get very stale. But you do want to satisfy people, and there's a reason why people like and anticipate that they're gonna be delivered something.
Like, I know there's this, like, in all my books, I know there's this one kind of pivotal scene that I hope will make the reader go, what? And then it's, how do I get from here to that scene? What information, and then how do I meet it out in a way that's mysterious but not confusing, right? There's a fine line between mysterious and confusing. We want, you mention a few people, you mention a name, an open window. That's all good and fine, but you have to deliver some more information. Otherwise, you just end up with a confused reader. But at the same time, you don't want to give away the whole store. My husband uses this expression. I'm going to get it wrong. You can't hide the ball. Is that right? Is that a basketball expression?
Aggie's not really.
Can I get some help from you, from a sports person? Like, you have to put the ball in play. You have to take out whatever your secret is, right? These books all have a secret. You can't hide it forever. At some point, you have to start, bringing it out. And yes, some readers might guess what it is. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully you'll do a good enough job and they won't. But you can't just wait till the last chapter and then, I've read the book where the last chapter literally said she had an identical twin and they were separated at birth. I swear to God, I read that book last year and I threw it across the room because I'm like, you can't have an identical twin that you were separated at birth from that you find out about in chapter 35. That's not fair play, right?
No, well, that would irritate me too.
Right.
It's like, yeah, and on the other side is like that thing about Chekhov's gun. Like, if you're gonna have a gun above the mantelpiece, and really make a point of it in an early chapter, that gun needs to appear again because then you're gonna be like, what happened to that?
But you don't have Chekhov's gun in chapter 1, and then chapter 2, she's polishing Chekhov's gun, and chapter 3, the
history of Chekhov's gun.
Right, and then chapter 4, let's put a picture of it on Instagram. And you're like, Jesus, just fire the gun already.
Yeah, get on with it, would you?
So it's this delicate balance. You want people to be. Anyone who reads thrillers and mysteries, anyone, you're looking from chapter 1. You're trying to figure it out. A part of your animal lizard brain is already racing. Oh, I bet they did it. Oh, you can't trust her. Oh, look at the way she walked away from him. Oh, look at that.
Right.
So you have to anticipate that and either encourage some of those tendencies or squelch those tendencies.
So the red herrings in thrillers, do you come up with those? I imagine, I don't write thrillers. So Haven Point, my novel that came out last year, is a multi-generational family saga. It's sort of more general women's fiction. But I'm assuming, you start with what happens, and then do you imagine roughly, or then imagine what might mislead people? Or
so I don't really know what happened when I started. I'll know about halfway through the book. I know it's just a hot mess in the beginning. I'm not giving anything away to say that my book starts with Mom is at the shore with her friends having the time of her life. She gets that phone call. Your daughter snuck off to Beach Week. The police have her.
And Mom is at Beach Week too,
Mom's
by
at
the way.
Beach Week, yeah. She's at Dewey. So I think as parents, we all live in fear of that phone call that our child is in police custody, or maybe I'm the only one. But so I just thought that's a great way to start it. I don't really need to know why quite yet, right? That's what I mean. I don't have the next thing quite yet. I know I have a faith that I'll figure it out when I get there. And then I keep every lead alive, because
even to yourself.
Yeah. So I don't figure out the killer until 4/5 of the book, when I get to the end.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, and that way I'm equally invested in everybody with the reader. I'm right there with you.
So, how does that work with your meticulous plotting? So if you don't know where
I don't plot.
Oh, you don't plot. Okay.
Yeah, no, I do the chapter outlines. This part's got to be told from this point of view. But
I gotcha. Okay.
Then I'm at the end, and I think I just have an organic sense. It really can't be that person, or that's not going to work out with this person.
Right.
It's gotta be this.
Well, the characters begin to take shape, and then
Then I go back and
Yes.
I really make sure it makes sense from the beginning.
Yes, that is true. Like it is hard if you have. I had something in my novel where I was like, wait, this character wouldn't do this.
Right.
And there was a lot that hung from that. And
It's
then
true.
I had to
You can't
change
just
it.
make someone a killer because you need a killer. Right?
Yeah.
Not everybody
Is a killer.
Yeah.
Right.
As much as, not everyone's capable, right? So,
Stop projecting.
Yeah.
You don't know.
I know. Not everyone. So sometimes, I'll write it and I'll think, come on, realistically, he might intellectually make a good killer, but no one's going to organically buy that he was motivated enough because she stole his parking space or something. Right? I like my killers to have a really good motive.
Well, parking gets a little tight.
It does.
In this town.
Especially at the Whole Foods on River Road.
I lived in Boston.
Homicidal situation right there.
Right, exactly. I lived in Boston where snow takes up a lot of parking spaces and people do get homicidal actually from time to time. But as a general rule, that's not the case. So I thought what I appreciated too was how I thought the school was sort of reflective, I think, of a lot of DC area private schools, and that there was some, especially sort of more non-sectarian ones, like some religious diversity, ethnic diversity, some socioeconomic, and I thought you treated that well in nuance, like in a way that was. I just wondered how you thought about that, or to what extent you thought about it at all.
I thought about it a lot. I knew when I wrote this book that I wanted it to reflect a more realistic DC, and also reflect kind of the world that I grew up in. And it was tough. It's really tough because on the one hand, I wanted it to be diverse. On the other hand, everyone has to be a potential killer. So you get into not wanting to, have your one, whatever, Brazilian, gay character be a potential killer. You don't want to stereotype groups. And it was threading a fine needle in there. I mean, I really enjoyed doing it, but it wasn't without any peril. And as you'll probably notice, thrillers tend not to be very diverse books. They tend to be pretty, white universes, sort of non-ethnic, non-religious, and they feel sometimes out of, not based in our realities. And so I wanted it to be based, and also this is all taking place. I wrote this during the pandemic when the protests were going on. I was watching that all the time. And so I think some of that seeped in, but I spoke to a friend of mine who is an internationally best-selling thriller writer, huge thriller writer. And I said, how do you do this? And she said, I would never write a non-white character.
Really?
I wouldn't take the risk.
Well, did she set them all in like a tiny town in the Cotswolds or something? Because I can't figure out how to
Connecticut.
Connecticut, okay.
So, I mean, it's a real issue in the, I don't know if that's too touchy a subject, but it's a real issue in the writing community is like, do you dare write characters from other ethnicity, races, religions, whatever? And if you do, are you doing a good job? I mean, I had a diversity reader. I had a very good friend of mine who's a brilliant professor at the University of Maryland read my book, just to kind of make sure I wasn't, doing anything egregious. But it was worth it because I think it added a level of realism and just another level to the book that might not have been there if I hadn't done that.
I thought you did a really good job.
Thank you, Virginia.
I thought it was great. So what was it like? Oh, wait, one more thing I wanted to say. Speaking of reality, too, another thing that I really appreciated and wondered how you thought about is there's a tendency, I think, when people write about sort of bullying, whatever, that it's often so kind of hackneyed and obvious. And I don't know, I felt like mean people were much more creative than they are in film, certainly, and in a lot of novels. Like, I'm like, nobody would actually say that. People like a really smart, sophisticated, possibly sociopathic, you know, mean girl in a high school is a lot cleverer than this.
Yes.
Like, they don't say these things to just beat people over the head. It's
I agree.
much subtler. And I wondered if you really thought about how, like, what that looks like, because it seemed like you had.
I did, and part of that I have to thank my kids
Who are really mean.
No. But they'll watch these movies or these TV shows and they'll say, nobody would do that. You know, they don't. I remember watching one of those American Girl doll movies with my kids, and she's new to this school, and the girls are like cutting her hair behind her back, you know, and they're like punching their own faces and then going to the principal and saying, she punched me. And my daughter's like, what? No, that's not how mean girls behave at all.
Right.
It's so subtle. Sometimes you can't even tell if they're being mean to you.
Right.
Until like 10 minutes later when it hits and you realize, oh,
I see what she was doing there.
When she said nice haircut, she didn't mean it. Right. You know?
Yeah. And then also, the tendency too, I thought and appreciated, because you had a sort of two timelines, one sort of pre-social media and one since.
Yes.
And that was also interesting. And because when you have a tragedy or something that happens, and I think to some extent that we have to be there's human nature to be curious about what happened, but also there is that tendency to want to be a part of the drama. And
yes.
I felt like that came through really clearly, and especially with the influence of social media.
Well, if you read my first book and this book, you know that the real villain in both my books is social media. Like, it always plays a terrible role. It's whatever's going on that's bad, it just is like fertilizer, and it makes it grow and become huge. And in this case, when a young person dies, the other kids at the school use social media in ways that, you know, are perhaps not the most thoughtful. Mm-hmm. And the moms too.
Yeah.
On a website called DC Urban Moms, which is a guilty pleasure of mine, and which I gave a little cameo to in this book.
Yeah, it deserves it, certainly.
Yeah.
So.
It's a rough place.
I know.
On DC. It's very rough.
Dog eat dog.
Yeah.
Dog eat dog. So just before, I want to leave some time for audience questions, but I wonder what you have on deck. What's coming next? Are you going to stay in this genre, or?
I think so, Virginia. I'm coming for Chevy Chase next.
Help you out. I can help you out. I've got an underground Bichon who can.
Yeah, I have a murder that takes place during the Cherry Blossom Festival. But it's not in Kenwood. It's in Summerwood.
Sumnerwood.
It's not Somerset. It's Summerwood.
Uh-huh.
It does back up to the Summerwood Country Club, but it's not Kenwood.
Okay, I
Just
gotcha.
so you know.
I gotcha.
Everybody, it's not Kenwood. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you very much. I wanted to open up for questions, and I think Elisa. Oh, do we have? Oh, there it is. There's a microphone here. You might not be able to see it in front of the pillar, but it is there.
Step
I
up.
promise. So if anyone has any questions, if you would just come up and use the microphone because they're
Come
recording.
up to the mic.
That would be great.
Yes.
Well, it sort of goes with what you were just talking about, these hyper-local communities, which of course we're both part of, so I get a guilty pleasure out of reading about them. But I know you had a lot of fun crafting your characters in your first book, because they were kind of like these mashups and thinly veiled references to real people in our neighborhood. I mean, so I'm wondering, like, in any kind of like Easter egg way, do any of them show up in the next book for their beach house, you know, like a certain realtor or like mother of triplets or oh wait, did I say that?
I don't think so. I don't think there is, although I do have Washington Prep alumni in my third book. So maybe we'll circle back around. Yeah.
So did you have sort of like, do you get invested in these characters that you feel like you know how they would act, like they're real people in real life, and you've created this like whole persona about them, and they kind of, like, you become involved with them like as if they're part of your real world?
Well, not that quite. Not
like
that. Yeah, that's a step too far.
Okay.
But I will say that, like, in this book, there is a character named Shelby. If anybody's read it, Shelby Covington. No, Shelby Covington. Yes, Smythe. And I loved writing her so much, and I kind of want to follow her throughout the rest of her life and see the damage she does. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to read it, so thanks.
Anyone else?
Yes, Max.
Is there any particular reason you went with doing beach cellar work? Because there's a lot of, in my experience, when I see where people end up with beach, I'm like, oh, they're Corolla, or
I'll just repeat the question. So that you
What?
can-
Why Dewey and not the Outer Banks or any number of other beach towns? I think it's because I wanted it to be the same place as in the 90s. And back in the 90s, I think people, in the 80s, people really did just hit those beaches. I don't think they were doing, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they were doing the Outer Banks quite then. So I wanted it to have that resonance. Plus, it's a geographical thing where somebody's house is within walking distance of the beach, but it's on the bay side. And Dewey's got that narrow little strip, so that's possible there, not possible in Rehoboth or in Bethany. So that's why I picked Dewey.
Dewey Beach had a nickname back in the day. Does anyone remember what it was? Does anyone know? Doomy Beach. Anyway, yes. Yes. Like I said, I didn't go to Beach Week, though, so I just... Anyone else?
Yes, from the young man in the front.
Yeah.
So I read the book. It's great. I think everyone should buy multiple copies. My question is, what do you have against elite DC private schools?
I have nothing against elite DC private schools. I have married a wonderful man who went to one and known many wonderful alums. And as I've told other people before, if I lived in Texas, I would write a book about that mom who hired a hitman to kill her daughter's cheerleading rival, right? So like this is just because I live in DC that I focus on this. I have no grudge against private schools, private school parents, or anybody from St. Albans in particular.
You know, it's a funny thing. Are you getting a lot of people asking you who've already read it, asking you, is it this school? Is it X? Is it Y? Like
Yeah.
who were persuaded you must be talking about one particular school with Washington Prep?
Yes. And is it autobiographical? And or who's your do you have a secret best friend? I've been asked. No, I don't have any secret best friends. It's not autobiographical, and it's not based on any private school at all.
It's so funny.
totally
and
made
it's such a, it's very, I still do this, you know, where you think something must be about one particular
Right.
place or person. And but when you're
I do
writing a
that.
novel, it's so, like, why on earth would you be a slave to a real life person when you could steal things from lots of different people
Right.
and places and cobble them together in a way that suits, you know, your
Yeah.
story, your characters, your themes.
Yeah, but I also read lyrics, and I'm like, who is he talking about when he's saying,
You're
know?
so vain.
Exactly. Right? Right. It's natural. We
Warren
always wanna
Beatty.
know.
Everybody knows it's Warren
Is it Warren
Beatty.
Beatty? Yeah. Yeah. So I understand why people do that, but the answer is usually very unexciting. Like I was just in my room in my pajamas and I just made it all up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's just great stuff to use from everywhere.
So in the first book, with one main character who in many ways is relatable, I think, to different types of people for a variety of reasons, and in this book it's told from 3 points of view, which each have pieces that are relatable for different reasons. How was that for you, and has it informed like other books that you may write in the future? Has it shifted your thinking about writing and bringing that into your genre?
I love that question. I really enjoyed writing from different points of view. I especially enjoyed writing the 1994 piece. I got to spend a lot of time Googling things like top 10 songs of the 90s, you know, what TV shows were popular in 1994. But no, I really did enjoy writing in what's called the third person instead of just in the first person, and from different points of view. And my next book will have many, many points of view.
Really? Well,
Many.
tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
your next book.
It's sort of, my editor called it like Knives Out at a garden party. So it'll be a murder mystery with lots and lots of suspects, and I'm really enjoying getting away. Because my first book, if you read it, was very intense. This one woman, very intense, and I love doing it, but it was a lot by the end. You probably felt that if you read it too, like, sheesh, this woman needs help. You know, I felt that also, and I was glad to kind of move beyond her. And then this was more fun being able to hop. You know, every time the daughter got annoying, I'd go to mom, and then when I got sick of mom, I'd go to 1994. So I have a touch of ADD. So this third one will be even more hopping, and I'm looking forward to it.
So Aggie, your books I think have both like a local audience and then a national audience to them, and the local audience I think loves the thriller and also all of the local references and so forth. And I guess I was just wondering, like, when you talk about your book with audiences in other parts of the country, do they love that kind of Washington D.C. angle as much, or do they mostly focus on the thriller, the story? Or does that not resonate as much for them, or is it even more fascinating because they're not living and breathing it? And then kind of as you go forward, you mentioned the Texas angle. Like, would you ever think about writing books that sort of transplant yourself into a place that maybe you don't know as well, but have a lot of the same dynamics, like a Dallas or a Chicago or some place that has a lot of the same kinds of things, but just as a very different localized context?
I don't think I'll ever write a book in Dallas or Chicago, but I might write a book in New York, where I'm from. I've thought about that. I've started writing that. The way publishing works, at least at my level, you don't get to write whatever you want whenever you want to. Is that like a dirty little secret right there? Right?
Yeah.
So I write DC thrillers. That's kind of where I'm at right now, and so that's what I'll be doing for a while. Which I love to do, but it's not like I can say, "Oh, I'm going to write a space opera next." It does. People aren't excited about that. They're like, "This was great. What's your next DC-based thriller?" So that's what I'm doing now, and I think people. It's not so much that people like the DC aspect, but there are certain things that the book buying public get excited about that I think normal people, even as a writer, you don't know until you get into this business. So this falls under dark academia. So if you know what that is, anyone? Yes, right. So it's a genre of books where terrible things happen in private schools and colleges. Like The Secret History, it was probably the most famous example. But, bad things happen in private schools and colleges, and people love it. They love this genre. So a lot of people said, ooh, dark academia. This also is a 90s book. So the millennials are out in force. They want to relive the 90s. They're gobbling up things that were written in the 90s. So there are things about this book that, and I think probably every book, your book too probably, that you didn't realize would appeal to people, because that's certainly not what I thought of when I wrote it.
Right.
But once it's out there, they do their own
Right.
stuff with it, the readers. Yeah.
Well, and in a general sense, schools like small towns, or Haven Point, my novel is set in a summer community, an insular summer community, make great settings for novels, and they're fun for authors because when you throw the same characters together,
Right.
day after day and year after year, there's just a lot of world building you can do, and Hogwarts, and
Right.
so we took out the magical elements.
What's that?
Yeah, I don't believe I've ever heard of that. Anyway, so it is fun, and they're cozy, and they are very insular and tend to have strong cultures. Schools have very strong cultures. So I would think that people wherever they lived would probably recognize some of that dysfunction. Although I think we really do it extremely well in this area.
I think people really like relationships in any kind of book that they read. So this is a strong mother, teenage daughter relationship. Anybody can relate to that who has a daughter, no matter where they live. My first book was about a new mom and that feeling of not doing it right and other moms judging you. I think that's a pretty universally American experience. You don't have to be from DC to kind of get
You don't
that.
have to be on DC Urban Moms where that
You don't.
flourishes.
Right. So I think people pull out the relationships from books, and that's what they relate to, no matter where they're set.
Yeah, I agree. Any other questions?
Yes.
So I live in Kenwood, and I just want to cancel our dinner reservation. My question is, now I'm nervous.
This is not based on Carolyn Friedman, this next book. Then, right?
My question though is, do you have a writing routine? Like this is about you specifically. Like,
Yeah.
do you have a way that you work, like the way you start writing, or create space for writing, or in the morning, right? Like how do you? What's your?
I have a fantasy of a writing routine. It never really seems to happen. It certainly didn't happen during the pandemic. On great days, I get up, I walk my dog for a couple miles, I get a cup of coffee, I sit down and I write. And I hit that maybe 50% of the time. So Those are kind of my odds. One thing I do, which is very specific to me and strange, is I write a rough draft on the computer that's about 20,000 words, and it's really a hot mess. Like, entire chapters will say, and then the bad thing happened, and she was scared and found the ring. Question mark, what is the ring? Right, that'll be a chapter, but doesn't matter. The idea is to get to the end. So I just write this thing out, I print it out, and that's when the real writing begins. I get my colored pencils, I get my little sticky tabs, I get my yellow legal pads, and I sit down and I handwrite and I fill in everything that's missing, and then I type it back into the laptop.
So that's your outline, basically.
Yes, that's my outline.
I
Right.
use the word for later, one word, for later. And I was just looking at the draft of my next novel. It's like there are entire chapters where it's like for later, for later, for
Right.
later, for later, for later, for later, for later. I'm like, it's
I think
later. I
forward
better get to
momentum
it.
is really important.
What is the
Forward momentum.
right? Right.
You can always go back and fill in. You can always go back and make better. But if you get hung up on that scene, that sentence, that dialogue, that word, you can
or
waste
go
a whole
down
day.
a research rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There's so many rabbit holes that I
Right.
think
Absolutely.
can get in the way. So
How do people write books before a computer?
So what a mentor of mine, who's like an uncle to me, has written several amazing biographies. He wrote a biography of Zola. He wrote a biography of Flaubert, and he would handwrite and then type it in on a typewriter. But you're right. He organized so much of what he wanted to say up here first, but I think handwriting and then into the typewriter.
do you do any other than like what you're doing onto the 20,000 word document? Do you handwrite anything like notes or just ideas or?
I do write
brainstorming?
notes. I write notes on pieces of paper, and then I shove them in my pockets or into drawers, and I never find them again.
Yeah. That's a real problem, because do you find that handwriting sometimes just that your mind works a little bit differently when you're holding a pen?
That's why I write out that draft.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it is a problem, because then you're like, wow, I got some really great thinking done today, and then you put it in a file. and
Well,
then
I
you
only
open
handwrite
up.
my book. I don't. Those notes thing I've stopped doing, because frankly, even when I find them, they say things, like the brown horse walked across the field, and I'm like, what? Who cares?
For later.
Right.
For later,
But
for
what
later.
does that mean? So it turns out that they weren't actual flashes of genius. They were just. It's like
Yeah.
having a little faith in yourself, like that when you sit down to do the work, it will come.
That's great. I get asked that question too a lot. Like, do you have a process? And people will be like, do you do this or do you do that? And I'm always like, that sounds so great. I should
Yeah.
totally try that. That
I'm gonna
sounds like
do
a
that.
great idea.
Like Stephen King, he has his
Stephen
desk.
King,
You
right.
go, you shut your door at 9:00. Someone brings a sandwich to you at noon. You eat it. You push the plate on the other side of the door. Then you write till 4. Then you go for your walk. Then you
Who is the person with the sandwich? That's
come
what
back
I'd
and have
like
a
to know.
drink. And I'm like, I love that. I'm totally gonna do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to see. Yeah.
He had 3 kids and a wonderful wife.
Yeah, somebody, exactly. I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, I see a missing ingredient here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
other questions?
Writing questions? Anybody? Anything? Publishing questions?
Genre questions?
How about a totally non-writing, non-publishing?
Yes.
I'm going to steal a page from the weekend section of the Washington Post. What's your DC dream day?
Oh, that's a good one. God, I have to just. Off
It's
the
not
cuff, huh?
July.
I knew you
It's
Right.
not in August.
It's not in July. It's not in August. That's true. Well, I'll just say the things I absolutely would do would be hit bookstores. So I'd hit Politics and Prose. And I'm not just saying that, Politics and Prose. I really mean that, because I do. I do often walk to Politics and Prose with friends. And I would go to the Capitol Crescent Trail, because I like a nice long walk on the Capitol Crescent Trail, as my dog Pistachio does as well. Hopefully my husband and my kids would join me as well. Maybe. I go to the farmer's market. It happens. They're coming with me. Then we're going to go to the farmer's market, where the kids will get crepes and I'll get sexy veggie gazpacho, which I buy like a dozen or 2 at a time and put them in the freezer. It's incredible. Their watermelon gazpacho is to die for. And then maybe we can finish off and have dinner at Aracosia. Yes.
right? Yes, everyone says yes, which is a really great restaurant with Afghani food.
So one question about ideas, just as a, like, do you find that, is there any certain circumstance where you find it easier to just come up with ideas or unexpectedly, or do you come up with them while you're sitting down at your computer?
All the time. My husband knows this. I'm constantly saying, well, what about this idea? And what about that idea? And my friends know this. I'm always running ideas by people. And most ideas are not good ideas, or most ideas are interesting but not enough for a book. Something funny or clever or unusual is not enough for a whole entire book.
Mm-hmm.
You know that. I mean, you need a lot more to sustain, 90,000 words. So a lot of things I come up with and I say, yeah, it's a great first 3 chapters, but there's nothing there. There's no heart there to carry it through.
And what about when you're in the middle of a story? Like, you're sort of deciding where things are going.
Yeah.
Again, is that like at the computer, or do you get ideas
Walking.
walking?
Always walking with my dog.
Not listening to podcasts.
No.
No, you can't come up with ideas while you're listening to a podcast.
Walking Capitol Crescent Trail with the dog. Big time.
Or driving long distances, not traffic.
Not me.
Not you.
Walker. Big walker.
Do you like driving?
I do like driving cross country. I don't like driving in DC.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Can't come up with ideas in traffic. It has to be like, I think it's like the default mode network of our brains. Like they say you get good ideas when you take a shower or something. Like when something you do, a rote activity that occupies some, I'm clearly not a STEM scholar, so don't listen to anything I'm saying, but like.
Definitely walking.
But there is something to that. But the problem with driving or
gardening. Gardening's a big one for me.
Gardening.
I'm out in the garden. I come up with lots of ideas. Things start working in my brain when my hands are busy in the garden. Big time.
So as we end, I wanted to go back. Sorry, go ahead.
So Fred is this gentleman who wrote the biography of Flaubert and Zola, and has been sort of a writing mentor and like an uncle to me my whole life, and he's a huge support. Huge support. He gave me books when I was young that were wildly inappropriate. He was that person who'd come over. I don't mean like dirty books. I mean just revolutionary type books. Like he gave me, I think I was in 4th grade or 5th grade when he gave me Claude Brown's Man-Child in the Promised Land, which I don't know if you know. So. Anyway, he gave me books that, were not age appropriate, and I've always loved him for it because he had high hopes for me, and I hope I delivered for him.
Well, I just want ending with the beginning. I think your story to me has always been so inspiring about how long you worked to publish a book.
Yes.
And you did lots of neat things in the meantime before it happened.
Yeah.
But I do think it's nice in case any aspiring writers here haven't heard your story, if you just share that.
If you haven't heard the story of the little engine that could, I wrote my first book when I was in my 20s. I just graduated college. I lived in New York. I was bartending. I got an agent. She tried to sell it. This was the 90s. We were told, we love it, but Gen X is dead.
That's me, by the way.
That's a lot of us. And give us your next book. And of course, I didn't have a next book, and I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. So I went on and did other things, and I became a newspaper reporter, and I wrote a second book. And essentially, the same thing happened. And my husband and I got married. I had kids. We moved abroad. We came back to D.C., and I was working at the Gazette when my dad, it was 2013, my dad called and told me that he was dying of lung cancer, and he had 6 months to live. And I burst out crying, and he said, don't cry for me because I've done everything I've wanted to do. I've loved my career. I've traveled. My dad was a psychiatrist. He loved his work. He taught residents. He was a very fulfilled, happy person. And when I got off the phone, I thought, can I say that about myself, that I've really done all the things that make me fulfilled? And I immediately joined a writing group at the Writer Center, which is an incredible resource if anybody's familiar. And I took a class, kind of a boot camp, butt-kicking class, where the instructor, it was unlike anything I'd ever taken. There was no discussion of metaphors or similes. It was, how many pages did you write? What's your excuse? It was just get the pages done, get the book finished, stop lying to yourself and making excuses. And I did. I got a book finished. I got an agent. I was very excited. She was excited. We were excited. And we went out and we got lots of great feedback. rejections across the board. And then I said, okay. And I wrote, I don't forgive you. And I brought it to my agent after about 1.5 years, 2 years. And I said, hey, I've written another one. And she said, great, send it. And I sent it to her. And then there were crickets. And I reached out to her and I said, did you get the book? And she said, yeah, I'm not really feeling it. I don't think, I don't think it's going to be competitive enough. I'm sorry. So at that moment, I was in the kitchen. I remember saying to John, maybe I should just stick it in a drawer and write another one. And John said, no, you fire her and get a new agent. And I said, oh, okay. So I did that. And the long story short, I got a new agent. There was a bidding war, 2-book contract. And here we are today. So it's been a long journey, but.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Aggie and Virginia, for being here. Let's give them another round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.